You're listening to 15 Minutes of Flame with Robert Phoenix.
Well, if that doesn't get you going in the morning, I'm not sure what will. I think I must have been on coffee when I did that little mix there. What's happening, everybody? Robert Phoenix, broadcasting to you live from Flyover, also known as lovely Fredericksburg, Texas. If you haven't been to Fredericksburg, I suggest you come on out. Come on out and enjoy the schnitzel and have yourself a nice glass of wine or two from the wineries in the area that are still learning how to make wine. Some have mature grapes. A lot of them come from out of the state, also known as California and West Texas. But it's okay. It provides some semblance of an economy, and clearly it's a destination for people because about 3.5 million people come through here every year. It's quite funny. There are small gangs of women that show up on the weekends here. And there are a lot of weddings that happen at these wineries. And so you'll see these gangs of women, anywhere between 5 and 15 strong, and they're out having dinner or they're drinking. And some of them will be wearing T-shirts to identify their gang status. One of my favorite ones was "Vines before vows." That was their saying: "Vines before vows." We're gonna have some vino before we say yes to the person of our dreams. And I would say that for the most part, they behave themselves. Every now and then they get a little mildly obnoxious. Strength in numbers, right? It's interesting to watch them, especially to see how if you spend any amount of time in the same space, watching how the hierarchy sort of fleshes itself out. So what's going on out there? How is everyone? I got some pretty good feedback on the show yesterday. People told me to keep the show longer and let the rant uncoil and keep drinking coffee. So yeah, I'm okay. Duly noted. I love the two-way. I love the back and forth with everything. I got some great comments on yesterday's show. Let me see if I can read one of them, because sometimes the comments that go over to the YouTube page are a little bit different. There's a great comment that I wanted to read. Let me go back there and find it. I should have front-loaded it so I can just go right into it and have that super smooth segue. Yeah. Like professional radio people do. Hey, I'm up to 3,749 subscribers. Which is pretty cool, right? Pretty cool. Not bad. Those are organic survivors. Those aren't bots. They are not bots. Get red pilled. Yeah, the red pills are out in abundance. We give out a daily dose of red pills here. Hold on a second. There we go. Sorry about that. This is a great comment here. It's a totally great comment. This is from Trog Auto Ego Krat 666. Great handle. I'm going to read you the whole thing in its entirety because it's such a good comment. I still enjoy Q, but I'm having some trouble with it. There have been several Q generations. Maybe they are the Cylons. There are definitely iterations of Q. If you missed the second hour with myself and Randy and Emily over on Off Planet, I talked about this symbolism of the cue ball in pool, right? What does the cue ball do in pool? It controls all the other balls. That's what they call it, the cue ball. It has no affiliation with anything. And you can't strike another ball without the cue ball. And if you play with cue ball a little bit, what do you get? Cabal. Just saying. I think this cue situation perfectly reflects what Jung wrote about in one of his late books, The Psychology of the Transference. Now we're getting somewhere. This happens with all political figures, and I lived through it with Obama, but Q is grabbing the transference effect from a whole bunch of folks who are not yet thinking in psychological terms that Freud and Jung tried to describe. People are being possessed by archetypes right now, with both Trump and HRC being clear examples where something very weird, and no one seems to want to withdraw their transferences and counter transferences. So that's true. Because once you're into the transference, what are you doing? On some level, you're absorbing power from a place of projection. It's not even your own power. You're tapping into it. It's worth reading the introduction to that book while thinking of all these phenomena. I think it was his final word on how to make sure you were keeping sane as a technical challenge in achieving real integration. The Amazon reviews of this book were great and give a great synopsis of this whole thing better than I could. I think Lacan had his own view of this area and called it the impasse, where essentially the student becomes the master. It is essentially the end of Jodorowsky's Holy Mountain, where we realize the gods, the masters, are nothing, and we are only looking for ourselves. Back camera. When I was in school, I attended lectures in a class where we read Ian Kershaw's book, The Hitler Myth. We read the first book, which was all that had been written then. It was about how Hitler assumed a propagated myth of the Fuhrer, just as Dick Cheney assumed the VP. It has a lot in common with both how both HRC and Trump built their campaigns. It seems to underline the psychological stress going on now. Really interesting book, by the way. The Psychology of the Transference as a Mass Phenomena in Practical Terms. Thanks for all your work. I listen every day. Well, thank you, Trog Auto Ego Krat 666, for chiming in and dropping that tidbit. He's absolutely right. The transference is a big deal. It's a really big deal. And we take part in it all the time. When we watch sports, what happens? We have moments of transference. I was watching the NBA last night. And I normally don't watch the NBA, but I like watching the playoffs. Because you get good teams, high stakes, great athletes, just doing things that are super freakish and abnormal. And there's transference there. Absolute transference. And there's this vicarious relationship with the athletes. And it's getting even deeper now that they're bringing in Oculus and they're bringing in actual VR experiences for the games now. If you look at the backboards, they have an entire array of lenses, probably about, 20 lenses on each backboard, which allows for that VR effect because you need all those lenses and you need all those images to create the VR experience. So that's what's going on now. So you could actually watch those NBA games in VR, and it's like you're almost in the game. Talk about transference. I mean, that is a quote unquote virtual transference. Anyway, thank you for the comments on YouTube. Comments are always appreciated. What do we have here? We have in the chat room, happy morning. Maury says hello to everybody last night or today. Diane says, I agree, keep it longer. Maury says, Holy Mountain, best movie I've ever seen. Jodorowsky. It's a really interesting short documentary with Jodorowsky and Daniel Pinchbeck on YouTube, which I highly, highly, highly recommend for a number of reasons. If you are not a Pinchbeck person, which is easy to be, by the way, I think Daniel started off in the right place, and I don't know. I think all those psychedelic drugs, and I think the demon that attached itself to him at Burning Man changed his trajectory. Hey, look, he's convinced that he's doing the right thing. It's okay. But anyway, there's a great documentary. It's small. You can watch it on YouTube. It's Daniel Pinchbeck with Jodorowsky, and that's in Paris. And he does a tarot reading. Jodorowsky does a tarot reading for Pinchbeck. And you can just see Pinchbeck getting like naked, and not in a flattering way, right? It's like the clothes are just being stripped off of him. And you can just tell how he's nervous. He's really nervous. And you know, so Pinchbeck's in Paris, and he's smoking, and you know, and Jodorowsky's like, "Why do you smoke? Why do you smoke, man? It's bad for you." You know, it's like it's terrible for you. It's very funny. I mean, he's a total Jodorowsky's a total trickster, and he completely pantses Daniel Pinchbeck. And by the way, I really thought that Pinchbeck's 2012 was a great book. It was a great read. I read it cover to cover, and I thought, wow, this guy's got some promise. Let's see what happens with him. And then he just gets, you know, co-opted like everybody else. Some level, right? Just check into their version of what they think that the world should be, which is okay. We all have that. Lots going on out there. Mike Pompeo got Bibi's back. Bibi got back. And it's Mike Pompeo. Oh, yeah, of course. You ever notice the color of the ties these guys wear? There's like a tie code going on. And Pompeo and Trump and Pence and all these cats, they'll wear like three different ties. There's the red tie, which is symbolic of power, right? And they're going to push an agenda, or they're going to push whatever it is that they're pushing at that time. And it's usually tapping into the patriotic zeitgeist, the Red Party, blood, the red and white stripes, right? Then there's the blue tie, the dark blue tie. And I think the dark blue tie tends to be more conciliatory. It's more empathic. You know, when they want to appear to be more sensitive, have people accept them. Out comes I think it's like a royal blue. They don't really go dark blue. And then there's the powder blue tie. And the powder blue tie is the same color as the Israeli flag. So that's a signal that, hey, we're with them. So those are the three ties you'll see. The red tie, which is the push, the call to action. The royal blue tie, which is the tie that symbolizes empathy and emotional congruence. And then the powder blue tie, which is we stand with them. And of course, Pompeo was wearing the powder blue tie yesterday as he clearly got behind this latest round of evidence. Another interesting comment came through yesterday, which is, I actually believe some of it and maybe not some of it. I'm going to read it. This is from Sarah Domeland. Yeah, I don't believe there will be a nuclear war because we are past that point. And besides, the positive ETs will prevent it due to nuclear explosions, disrupt the solar system and other galaxies, timelines, and dimensional planes. Laugh out loud. At least she's like, perhaps it's true in a little tongue-in-cheek, which in some ways is really not a bad stance. How is that for denial? From the perspective of plausible deniability. Well, Sarah, I think you're doing a good job of practicing plausible deniability. And I do think that we are being visited by people from beings from other, at the very least, other dimensions, other planets, other star systems. I'm all for it. I'm all for it. Good or bad, I don't care. They're just like us, right? I mean, you know what I mean? You're going to find good eggs and bad eggs out there. And one of the, kind of the rumors on the streets, in fact, I think Clyde Lewis was talking about this yesterday or a couple days ago, is that the hybrids are walking amongst us. And I know for a fact that they are. Back in the 1980s, I was really into the whole UFO thing. It was kind of a big deal for me, right? And I actually met a woman whose father was in the military and was connected to the UFO phenomenon. Her sister was a therapist, and she was doing John Mack style of hypnotic regression and working with two people who were abductees. And I actually think I have one of the interviews up on YouTube, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's there. I have another one on tape somewhere. I just saw it after I moved. And both of these people displayed very strange physical characteristics. Let me tell you, they are very unusual. Very, very unusual. One of the things that you can see with hybrids, and I kid you not, I know this sounds crazy, but there are kind of a group of them that look like sort of gargoyles. They have kind of a gargoyle-esque sort of, that's one version. I've seen it. And there's a, striking lack of symmetry in the face. And anyway, I don't want to get too far out there because I want to bring it back to terra firma, today's topic. Let's see what we have also here. We got one more comment in the chat room, then we're going to get off and running here. Let's see. So is Hogg a hybrid? I think David Hogg is a hybrid. And I was going to go there. I mean, if you look at David Hogg and his physiognomy, he looks like a gray alien hybrid. If you look at his body, he's like totally spindly. Like his arms are about the size of Jasper's arms. You don't know Jasper. Jasper's the show cat. And he's sitting about 2 feet away from me right now. And his legs are probably not that much larger than his arms. And then he's got this enormous head, which is, kind of goes into this, kind of convex and the pointy chin, which looks like kind of that gray pointy chin. I would not be surprised if he's like some kind of MyLab experiment. Maybe the reason why you can't find his birth certificate was because he was born in level 6 in Las Cruces. I don't know. But he certainly has some unusual physical traits. And I will say this about David Hogg. Okay. He has something that, and I'm not saying this because I'm like, having some kind of transference experience, but man, that kid, he's not really a kid. I guess anybody under 25 for me is a kid. He has this ability to articulate and punch words and galvanize. So he actually has some mesmeric traits, which I'm sure he has been coached in, but might also be part of some other program that is deeply embedded in his unique network of DNA. We're going to talk a little bit about Kanye today. And this whole Kanye phenomena is really interesting and strange. But before I get into Kanye, I got to go through a few more stories. Because I know that there are people who like the short show and there are people who like the longer show. So today I'm going to get into some stories. We're going to get into the stories and then we're going to verge off and kind of explore to free associate with the Kanye stuff. So let's get into this. See, a couple of things that crossed my radar screen this morning. And this does have to do with David Hogg. And in fact, I actually tweeted this. I've been trolling David Hogg on his Twitter feed. I picked up 104 likes on one comment to a reply from some guy in Italy that I took question with. 104 like hearts. Can you believe that? It's the most likes I've gotten for any comment on Twitter ever. I'm starting to meld into Twitter a bit more. Twitter's a vibe thing, man. You got to get the vibe. Okay. So this is from CNS News. 65% of public school 8th graders not proficient in reading. 67% not proficient in math. And you think that those numbers are going to go up anytime soon? Well, I bet you in the next 5 years they will be proficient in discussing details of aberrant sex. They may not be able to tell you what a dangling participle is, but they may be able to show you how to insert the dildo into an anus. Right? I'm sorry, but that's where it's going. Let me read this. 65% of the 8th graders in American public schools in 2017 were not proficient in reading, and 67% were not proficient in mathematics. Just wrap your head around that number. According to the National Assessment of Educational Progress test results released by the U.S. Department of Education, the results are far worse for students enrolled in some urban districts. That's not even the urban districts. We're talking suburbia. Among the 27 large urban districts for which the Department of Education published 2017 NAEP scores, the Detroit Public Schools had the lowest percentage of students who scored proficient or better in math, and the lowest percentage who scored proficient or better in reading. Only 5% of Detroit Public School 8th graders were proficient or better in math. Only 5%! Only 7% were proficient or better in reading. Okay. Let's just freeze frame that just for a moment. Okay. What is Detroit in terms of its ethnographic makeup? It's going to be mostly African American. And what did Obama do for 8 years while he was president of the United States? Did he do anything? Anything to help that community? Anything to raise it up? This is what Kanye talks about, by the way. the modern day prophet. Kanye, by the way, has become Peter Finch's character on Network. That's the corollary. That I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. That's what Kanye has morphed into. Howard Beale. Kanye has become Howard Beale. He is the Howard Beale of Twitter. All right, let's keep going. Only 5% of Detroit public school 8th graders were proficient or better in math. Only 7% were proficient or better in reading. It's a travesty. You're sending these kids out into the world with absolutely no chance whatsoever to succeed. And not only that, but this is a generation at some point that has to step into being able to, guess what? Maintain and uphold the structure of our civilization, our society, whether you like it or not, whether you're into it or not, whether you agree with it or not. There are certain fundamental things that have to keep going, unless it all falls apart, in which case, what are you going to do with a group of kids, a whole group of kids that are only 5 to 7% literate? You think you're going to be able to reason with them? And I'm not being fear-based or fear-mongering. That's not what I'm doing. I'm just trying to lay this out. These are really, really important things we have to wrap our heads around. Okay. In the Cleveland public schools, only 11% of 8th graders were proficient or better in math, and only 10% were proficient or better in reading. This is why they're bringing people in from outside the country. This is why the Indian culture has been really successful here. Why? Because they're literate. They don't have Common Core in India. They don't have Common Core in China. They don't have Common Core Korea or North Vietnam or South Vietnam. They don't. So what's happening is we're getting people from outside the country who are actually able to step in. And if they're not doing that, they're opening AM/PM mini marts with extremely favorable loans. In the Baltimore public schools, only 11% were proficient or better in math, and only 13% were proficient or better in reading. These are terrible figures. Terrible, terrible figures. And we are doing these kids a supreme injustice. Not only for their present, but for their future as well. So the urban districts ranked by percentage of 8th graders proficient in math. This is the 2017 NAEP test. Charlotte's number 1 at 41%, Austin number 2, 38, San Diego third at 36, and downward it goes until you get to the bottom. Detroit at 5, Fresno 11, Baltimore at 11, Cleveland 11, Milwaukee 12, Shelby County 12, Philly 16, Fort Worth 19, Atlanta 19, Dallas 20, DC 20, LA 20, Albuquerque 22, Houston 24, Miami-Dade 24. It is a very long climb to get to 41 in Charlotte. In terms of reading, Austin is number 1, San Diego number 2, Hillsborough County number 3, Boston 4, Duval County 5, and at the bottom, of course, we have Detroit, Cleveland, Baltimore, Fresno, Milwaukee, Dallas, Fort Worth, Shelby County, Houston, Philadelphia, D.C., L.A., etc., etc., etc. Among the states, Louisiana public elementary schools did the worst in teaching students math, and New Mexico public elementary schools did the worst job teaching reading. In Louisiana public schools, only 19% of the 8th graders were proficient or better in math, and only 25% were proficient or better in reading. In New Mexico public schools, it was 24% for reading and 20% for math. This goes on and on and on. The Department of Education's National Center for Education Statistics describes what it means to be proficient in math and reading. 8th graders performing at the proficient level should understand the connections between fractions, percents, decimals, and other mathematical topics, such as algebra and functions. It says NCES. Students at this level are expected to have a thorough understanding of basic level arithmetic operations, and understanding sufficient for problem solving in practical situations. When it comes to reading, 8th grade students performing at the proficient level should be able to provide relevant information and summarize main ideas and themes. They should be able to make and support inferences about a text, connect parts of a text, and analyze text features. Students performing at this level should also be able to fully substantiate judgments about content and presentation of content. This is not random. This is a planned demolition of education inside of the public school system, and much of it is thanks to Common Core, which was done to confuse, demoralize, and alienate our youth from the learning process. Learning, theoretically, should be a marvelous experience. You're young, you're curious, you're bright-eyed, you want to know things. And what happens, they scramble the neurosynaptic wiring in these kids' brains by dosing them on Common Core, and of course, these ridiculous tests now that are tied to school and district performance and ultimately money that the schools, the districts get from the state and federal government. Now, here in Texas, we don't have Common Core, but I'll tell you what, they've got a system of learning that's not too unlike Common Core, because we have this STAR testing that goes on all the way up through high school. You've got to pass those tests. So why am I talking about this? Because these are the kids, 7th and 8th graders, to some, and obviously some high schoolers, that are being targeted by the likes of March for Our Lives and David Hogg. They can't even do math. They can't even read properly and have proper comprehension and make abstract connections between the content and the theme and the narrative and the sub-narrative. They can't do any of this stuff, but they'll walk out of their classrooms I sent David Hogg a little tweet about this. So let's go to the next level, and let's talk about the generation above them, which is the millennials. Some very interesting things are happening with the millennials. This is from Zero Hedge, authored by Tom Luongo. I'm going to read this. Elections are governed by the middle-aged. Political movements are sustained by youth. It's no secret that older folks vote in higher proportions than younger. They simply have the most at stake in any election as changes in policy, usually taxes, affects them the most. Absolutely. They wouldn't put in a ball field here in Fredericksburg because the old people wouldn't vote for it. They wanted to attach it to a tax, and the old people said, I'm going to be, why do I need a baseball field? Screw it. I'm going to take that money that I'm going to be saving on that baseball field, and who knows what I'll do with it. But the energy which sustains a political party comes from how well it can mobilize the youth. And for 2 generations, the youth in America sustained the Democrats through their appeals to emotion and fairness, through the lens of cultural Marxism and democratic socialism. It doesn't hurt that the institutions of education and media have been completely taken over by these ideologies to the point where we find ourselves today. But like all things that swing too far in one direction, the counter trend begins to take hold. This is life. This is the universe, which ultimately provides its unique waveform of balance, right? When things are out of balance, things come, they have a wave, it comes back into balance. It is the homeostatic carrier wave for our reality. It happens, unless, of course, it's hacked, in which case the signal is hacked. Let's keep going here. So color me not shocked when I see the results of a new poll that says millennials are souring on the Democratic Party. And Mr. Luongo says, I knew they would, and said so back in October 2016. in an article called The Authenticity Gap. I'll read it. But the big problem for Hillary is those Bernie millennials who will not turn out for her, which is absolutely true because Hillary was as phony as a $3 bill. And they knew it. Remember, the millennials have Pluto and Scorpio, and they are a collective group of bullshit detectors. This is a generation more aware of how screwed they are than mine was. And while their political identity is in flux, reared on a diet of Comedy Central snark as a coping mechanism for the lying, they have a near obsession with natural things. This is true. Real fiber clothing, lumberjack fashion, farm to table food choices. We've talked about this before. This is where the millennials can really shine. Remember, they've got Neptune and Uranus and Capricorn. We got Saturn and Capricorn right now going through that part of their outer planetary chart, which means that they can take charge. They can take charge of their lives, start little businesses, get into these things. Maker culture. This is the time for millennials to be able to sort through everything, keep it real, and make products that have some kind of longevity, real sustainability, not this fake bullshit sustainability. Viability, longevity, sustainability, and value. It's their time. If you're a millennial listening to this, look, I'm rooting for you, okay? Get on the stick. If you don't like the world you're living in, if you don't like the parties that are representing you or want to represent you, create your own. If you don't like the system that you were raised in and you're holding out for values that are different than the commercial, commodified, and corporatized values, create your own. You can do it. And in a lot of ways, the world is kind of depending on you. I mean, look, and we talk about things in terms of generational succession. We still have people that are in power from the Pluto and Cancer period. This is true. Henry Kissinger, right? He's a Pluto and Cancer guy. He's still around. George Soros, Pluto and Cancer, still around. What is I think Queen Elizabeth might even be Pluto and Taurus, if I'm not mistaken. I think she's probably close. I haven't looked at her chart. But there's a lot of Pluto and Cancerian people still in power. And then you've got Pluto and Leo, which is, the generation after that, but they're getting older. Trump is Pluto and Leo. So it's going to be on the Pluto and Virgo people, the Pluto and Libra people, and the Pluto and Scorpio people to be able to sustain a model. Now, the model may look very different, and I'm all for that. Doesn't have to look the same, but some level of sustenance, continuity, and constancy has to be in place in order for this thing to keep going and keep going in a way that is better than what it is now. So if there is a rejection of corporate culture, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, I think it's probably a good thing. And then we have to come into that Saturn and Capricorn effect, downsize it, take responsibility for the business or the idea that you have. The challenge is, this is a real challenge for some people. Let's say you wanted to start a restaurant. You're young, you're ambitious, you want to go farm to table. It's not impossible. I don't want to shit on your dream, okay? But one of my ex-girlfriends, very successful restaurateur in San Francisco. That is a hard thing to do, really hard. Because I sat in her apartment one night and I saw stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks of like papers, receipts, bills that she had to do herself because of a local audit and a bunch of other stuff, right? And if that's Starbucks, she's not doing that. She's not. Corporations get all kinds of breaks. They get tax breaks, get all kinds of breaks in order to allow them to move into a city and become popular and make lots of money. In San Francisco, very difficult to be in. It's not impossible, okay? So don't give up your dream. You just have to keep going. Let's see. He gets a little snarky here, but it's okay. They've turned their masters of social justice into PhDs in cocktails, cappuccinos, and craft beers, and bless their hearts, I can finally get a good whiskey sour when I visit my friends in South Florida. At least now some of them are entrepreneurs. Their cultural identity is one big cry for authenticity in a sea of smarm. Hillary's authenticity gap is simply too big for many millennials to square with that value system. Absolutely. Remember, Pluto and Scorpio here. So I'm going to keep going. It says 18 months later, after Hillary's historic rebuke, it's morphing into general disdain for the reaction to it. This is the story from Reuters. The online survey of more than 16,000 registered voters ages 18 to 34 shows their support for Democrats over Republicans for Congress slipped by about 9 percentage points over the past 2 years to 46% overall. And they increasingly say the Republican Party is a better steward of the economy. Although nearly 2 of 3 young voters polled said they do not like Republican President Donald Trump. Their distaste for him does not necessarily extend to all Republicans or translate directly into votes for Democratic congressional candidates. They want to figure this thing out on their own because they're looking at their choices. And it's like, The Democrats need the millennials. They are moving out of the youth vote and into the middle-aged voting bloc. Yes, they are. The first millennials showed up around, 1984, 1985, right around then. Do the math on that. Where are they now in terms of their age? The oldest millennials, 33, 34 years old. By the time we get to 2020, those millennials are going to be, 36 years old. They're 4 years away from 40. They're creeping into their 40s. This is why they're going after the kids in high school, by the way. The DNC knows all this stuff. I mean, they are deep into psychographics. They know what's going on. They're mining data constantly. They looked at that last election. If Bernie Sanders had run as an independent, I think there's a good chance he would have defeated Trump. He was not going to do that. They roughed his ass up, didn't they? Remember when he showed up with the black eye? Could you imagine that moment where they go into Bernie Sanders' hotel room? Hey, what are you doing there? Hey, come on now, come on. Bernie? Listen, bitch, you're going to drop out of the race. You understand us? Okay. But guess what, Bernie? That's the good cop in the back. Guess what, Bernie? You get to keep all that money. All that money you raise, you get to keep. Okay. No problem. Do I still get to be a senator? We'll let you know about that, Bernie. All right. Next day, very contrite. I'll do anything to support candidate Clinton. Her quest for the White House. Sorry. Bernie Sanders. Initials are BS. I mean, look. Bernie's actually coming out and, kind of taking on the whole Palestine thing. Let's see where he goes with the whole Israel thing. Another guy I troll on Twitter is Robert Reich. Oh, he's so anti-Trump. Man, he's anti-Trump. I told you, I was at a cafe in Berkeley one time with Robert Reich. Not that I was hanging out with him. That's not a guy I'd want to hang out with. I watched him. He sat 4 feet away from me. And he was there with us, intellectual Berkeley prof pals. What a dour bunch that was. Holy shit. Man. He's short. He's a short man. They sat around drinking their tea, and every now and then somebody'd say something in kind of a hushed tone, and they'd kind of, nod. And they must be very smart. They must be incredibly smart because, smart people don't talk a lot. They're not very loud. At least that's what I've been told. The Democrats need the millennials. They are moving out of the youth vote and into middle-aged voting bloc. The homeland generation, as termed by Strauss and Howe of fourthturning.com, or Generation Z, will only further this trend as the artist generational archetype. They are going. This is why David Hogg, this is why March for Our Lives, this is why all this energy is being spent now. It's not just to take the guns away. It's not just to create a shredded version of the Second Amendment. It's not to alter our First Amendment rights, although those are part and parcel of what's going on. They are farming. That's what they're doing. They're farming. They're farming and they're trolling the 18 and under group because that's what they want as their new voter bloc. They've lost the millennials and they know it. The millennials are the generation that will build the next version of society. Their rejection of Democrats, while not embracing Trump or necessarily the Republicans, points towards a different political identity, which the Democrats have not figured out or have shown any willingness to counter. No, they don't want it. The Democrats are social Marxist. That is their program. That's what they want. They're representatives of the neoliberal wing of the duopoly. The other side is the neo-con wing of the duopoly. One gives us a fascist state, the other gives us a Marxist state. People haven't figured that out yet. When you figure it out, you'll, pull the plug and you'll see what's going on with the programming. Cue Steeler's wheel. Here I am, stuck in the middle with you. Clowns to the left of me, jokers to my right. Here I am, stuck in the middle with you. Got to flush them both. We can't sustain or coexist with both of these pieces of the vice grip getting closer and closer and closer and closer and closer to us each and every day. And then you've got the MAGA freaks on the right who are clearly aligned with another version. They love Israel. Israel's nationalist. They are a nationalist, identitarian state. And that's why the MAGA people love it. It's like, yeah, sure. There's a model of nationalism in the world that's working. How about that? Yeah, it's nationalized. They're not letting anybody in. Hell to the no. Well, there are other versions of nationalism in the world, believe it or not. But they're not the only ones. Japan's a nationalist country. Think about it. Japan is intact. Does Japan ever take any refugees in? No, not at all. Does Japan have really, really strict regulations and rules about citizenship? Absolutely. Is Japan a socialist economy? No, they're not. They actually produce things. They're a capitalist economy. They're a nationalist. See, there are other nationalist countries that are in the world. It's not the only one, but that's the one that we identify with. Now with Kanye West trying to blow apart the codependent relationship between black-white voters and the DNC oligarchy, this country is ripe for a complete realignment of the political power structure. Kanye West, man, we're going to talk about Kanye. So let me just finish this. I want to read a couple more things. We'll segue into Kanye. Conway and Kanye. Kellyanne Kanye. There's a meme. One of you meme makers out there should exploit that. Kellyanne Kanye. Oh man, that would be fun. There's a lot of morphine software. You can put the two together. Kellyanne Kanye. Okay, let me keep going. This is not to say that the libertarians or Greens will somehow swoop in to collect these disaffected millennials. No, I think both parties are terminally compromised by DNC and RNC operatives and money to see them capitalize on this transition. Absolutely. I remember full well just how strongly the youth vote was energized for Ron Paul's runs for president in 2008, 2012. He smartly encouraged them and made the point over and over that his movement wasn't about him, but was about ideas of liberty and a new way of looking at politics. It wasn't enough to win the presidency, and more there's the pity, but more is the pity. But it set the stage for what we saw in 2016, and what we're continuing to see today. Trump is the current beneficiary of the flux we find ourselves in. The millennials and minorities that Democrats have taken for granted and misused, if not outright abused, for the past generation will not turn out for midterm elections. The history of voting in this country is quite clear in this. So whatever blue wave the DNC thinks is coming, it's not happening in 2018. If the fundraising numbers are an indication, which are frankly terrible. If it doesn't happen in 2018, and the pillars of the Democratic Party, Clinton, Obama, etc., go to jail for attempting to frame a sitting president, then it won't happen in 2020 and beyond. The Democrats are facing the kind of terminal loss of confidence that destroys political parties and the ideologies which back them. It couldn't happen to a nicer group of oligarchs. Look, I think the Democratic Party is important. But we don't need this version of the Democratic Party. We need a Democratic Party that actually stands for something. We need to stand for small business. We need to stand for small business. We need to stand for the little guy. We need to stand for less corporatism at every single turn, whether it's our food, whether it's our health care, whether it's our communications, whatever it is. That's what they need to stand for. But they don't, because they're taking money from all the corporations. They're so compromised, they're so toxic, they're so cancerous that maybe it might not be a bad thing for them to die off. And I could say the same thing for the right, the Republicans. They're just as toxic and cancerous as it is. The only thing with the Republicans is that at the very, very least, there's been this thread of destroying politically correct thought, which I think is really important. Now, most Republicans, they won't go there. But Trump, for all of his warts and all of his sellouts and his bowing to the landlords of the Wailing Wall, he at least initiated this cavalcade of people being unhinged from politically correct thought and speech. And that process is not pretty at the beginning. It's not. A lot of pent-up stuff comes out. But after a while, if people can work through it and liberate themselves from their pent-up aggression or their bottled up stereotypes, or trust me, people cry racism. Well, there is racism in the world. There is the racism is basically created by people that don't understand one another. That's number one. And number two, racism is also created by people who won't speak truth to power. And that goes for both sides of any debate. All right, let's move on to another one. These are two really interesting stories, and I promise we're going to get into the Kanye stuff. This one is going around here on the internet, Twitter. Very interesting. These are both from the Free Thought Project. Police cadets quit exposed department for training cops to view public as cockroaches. They're at war with. Nearly a dozen police recruits quit their training program and are now calling at the department for trying to teach them aggressive tactics that do not serve or protect the republic or the public. So I'm going to kind of blast through this. It takes at least 4 years of college for an enlisted person in the military to become a military officer, which is quite a contrast from the mere 9 months it takes for a police officer to earn the title. But according to a group of 10 former Austin Police Department recruits who wanted to become peace officers just like the military, the Austin PD is training warriors instead of guardians. The former recruits are now blowing the whistle and claiming that the type of mentality they encountered is not what they signed up for and is not representative of the greater Austin community. Summer Spisak, a 38-year-old former tech employee who participated in 9 weeks of the 8-month academy last year, said instructors told her and other cadets they would punch them in the face if they said they wanted to be police officers to help people. Now, long time ago, I don't know how I entered into this conversation. I was at a bar in California, and I got into a conversation with somebody who was training to be a CHP, and there was another person there who might have been a CHP person. I forget how I got into this. But they were talking about the process of being a CHP. And one of the things that their training officer did is they did punch them in the face. They were all lined up and they all got hit in the face. That was part of their training. I don't know if that's what every CHP training officer does, but that's what this guy did. SPSAC and others are now sounding the alarm for the public, saying police are being trained to view community members as the enemy, not as their fellow citizens. It is so different from what is portrayed. It's so different from my expectation of the Austin Police Department. SPSAC concluded. KVUE continued by describing another former recruit's observations of the police training program being currently implemented at the Austin PD. Jonathan Murray, who now works in sales for Dell, said instructors repeatedly degraded the homeless and prostitutes, referring to them as cockroaches, suggesting they find a transient if they were bored and wanted a felony arrest. Viewing sex workers as insects and the homeless as potential targets for prosecution differs vastly from the generalized public perception of officers as those who are sworn to protect and serve members of the community. According to the former recruits, officers of the peace should have a guardian mentality as opposed to a warrior mentality or mindset the recruits and graduates are being taught to possess. Both SPSAC and Murray joined 8 others who voiced their concerns in a letter to 2 different news agencies. Their objections were met predictably with denial by Austin's chief of police, Brian Manley. They have a manly man as the police chief of Austin. You can't make this shit up, right? Right? So we have a strong police force. Our chief of police is manly. Sorry. Who claims his cadets are trained to be both guardians and warriors. Okay. You can have both. It can taste good and it can be good for you. We train our officers at the Austin Police Department to be guardians, but to have the ability in the moment to become a warrior when it is necessary. Maybe we should be training our citizens to be guardians and warriors. See, this is the big problem. A long time ago, I got into this on my website. I have an article. I spent a lot of time on this because I thought about it. It's like, what happened to men? Well, what happened to men is men got castrated. How did men get castrated? Well, first of all, men got castrated because mostly due to the fact that there were other men in society doing their job. Right? What is a man's function in a family? It's to protect the family. I know it sounds archaic. It sounds really, really Neanderthal. But that's what one of the man's functions is to protect the family. And when we began to have professional protectors, what happened? The man in the family had part of his right and dignity taken from him. He wasn't protecting the family anymore because there were paid protectors. So men became a bit more toothless. As time went on, men have been really struggling with their role in society. Well, what are they? Now men aren't just soldiers. Now women are soldiers. Right? Now, you may say, well, that's regressive. Of course, I'm just telling you, I'm looking at it from the man's perspective. Men have lost their dignity. They've lost their path. They're here to protect. They're here. Look at nature, right? Look at the male lion. What's he there to do? He's there to stay up at night and patrol the perimeter so that nobody gets to the cubs and the female lions. That's what he's there to do. He stays up at night. He protects. During the day, he sleeps. He has meat brought to him. And he has sex. That's what the male lion does. But at night, he's patrolling the perimeter. So this is what happened to us. And it's not great. So now we have, again, this metastasized version of and it's inverse, right? It is inverse to what's happened to men. because the quote unquote guardians slash now warriors are, metastasizing into going beyond the police force in a small army. And that's been happening since 9/11, when DHS was starting to release all these funds to militarize the police. And what are they doing? They're going over to, again, that bastion of nationalism and learning how to police people vis-a-vis the IDF. And who are they policing? They're policing the Palestinians. You see? This is what's going on. And so we're having this metastasized, inverse relationship to the lack of direction, focus, purpose for men in our society. When I became a father, I didn't go through the normal father trip. Well, there are people, I know men, as soon as they became a father, man, they're like, I'm ambitious. I want to go out and make a lot of money. I want to be successful. I want to provide for my family. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. I didn't do that, though. Don't get me wrong. I did provide for my family. I did. I made 6 figures. Did a pretty good job. But something else clicked off inside of me. I became very protective of the next generation. And I looked around and I saw what was happening in the world. And I said, if my kid is going to have a life that is organic and analog and all those things that I think he really deserves, he wants a shot in a world that is not polluted, not toxified, not fucked up, not screwed up, not altered, not programmed, not triggered, then I got to get on the stick. And that's how a lot of this started. Because somewhere inside of me, the male lion awoke, and I started to patrol the perimeter. And it wasn't the immediate threat. It wasn't that somebody was going to break in to our little 3-bedroom house in suburban, East Bay, California. No, the threat was out there. It was an existential yet imminent threat that was much more insidious. So that's, to a large extent, that's what triggered a lot. And I figured this out years later, probably about 3 or 4 years after the fact. Oh, this is why I'm doing this. It's my version of it. Part of the motivation, it seems, to train police to be warriors comes from the false perception that there is a war against law enforcement. There are absolutely zero statistics to support the claim that there is a war on cops at work in the streets of America. That's not true. There is a bit of a war on cops. And quite frankly, if I was a cop, I would look at every single person as somebody that could do bodily harm to me. I'm sorry. That's the way it is. I can see it from their point of view. If you don't, you're a freaking moron. Because any slip up, anything that could happen could be your last day. And I don't, I have a lot of respect for that. At least that position. But really what we should be doing is we should be policing ourselves. Really, we should be taking all that back, right? All that back. The ability to police ourselves, the ability to know, to be trained, in arms, in community, stuff like triage, everything in our communities need to be cleaned up. And how are they going to get cleaned up? People need jobs, man. They need jobs, and they need jobs that are 40-hour a week, sustainable, fulfilling jobs that give you pride, right? You take pride in what you do. This is another thing that's been removed from us, is the pride in what we do. Do you think somebody who works 3 jobs has pride in what they do? No, they're surviving. At one point in time, there is a deep ethos in this country that you could make something. You could make something that had quality. You could make something that mattered. And at the end of the day, you were responsible for that thing, and you put your heart and soul in it, and you walked away and said, I had a good day today because I made something. I believed in it. It was high quality, and it's going to help somebody, and you get paid for it, right? We've lost this completely. And what do do you think we're going to do with kids that are 67% illiterate in math and in English? Do you think would they be ready for that kind of transference? No. I mean, we've got a lot of structural reorganization and plumbing to do in this place. And I'm just talking about this place. Other parts of the world, you may have similar issues or challenges, but I think these are kind of unique. All right, let me move on to one more story. And this does have to do with self-policing. See how I'm doing this today? Segue. Again, from the Free Thought Project, Dad in America told his son had to die, like Alfie Evans, but he resisted with guns, and his son lived. As a tragic story, baby Alfie begins fading from headlines, it is important to point out what allowed this situation to unfold like it did: guns. Before throwing your arms in the air and screaming out, "How the hell does this child's death have anything to do with guns?" Consider the following truth. The majority of the United Kingdom is unarmed, leaving most guns in the hands of criminals and government. When only government has guns, they can make decisions like kidnapping a baby and starving him to death without fear of recourse from the citizens or even the family. That is an immutable truth. You may not like it, but it's true. Officials in the UK sentenced baby Alfie to death this year when they denied his parents the ability to fly to Italy to receive free treatment at no cost to the British government. The decision was entirely arbitrary, as it had no bearing on Britain's healthcare system. They had nothing to lose by allowing the family to fly to Italy, and they had everything to gain. Instead of allowing the family a last-ditch effort to save their baby's life, however, the state effectively kidnapped him and an armed police officer standing outside the hospital to make sure he was left out there to die. His parents, Kate and Tom, were helpless to resist. Isn't that interesting? Kate. His mother is Kate. Isn't there another Kate mother in England recently of renown? Just had a baby. Isn't that interesting? Instead of allowing the family, okay, we said this, okay, Jesse Kelly. Why do I need an AR-15? Because someday the government may tell me I'm not allowed to put my sick son on a plane and fly him to Italy for treatment. And believe me, when I tell you, I'll be putting him on that plane. Hashtag Alfie Evans. And by the way, 13,000 people responded, 20,000 people liked the tweet. While many consider this tweet as a threat of violence toward government, it is nothing of the sort. Kidnapping a child and starving him to death is violence. Promising you'll try to stop it by any means necessary is self-defense. But no single person with a gun could ever prevent the state from carrying out a government-sanctioned death sentence on their child for being sick, right? Wrong. George Pickering Sr. from Houston, Texas, proved this was possible just 3 years ago. Pickering's son, George Jr., was declared brain dead in 2015 after having suffered a massive stroke. The decision to end Pickering's son's life had been made. However, desperate to keep his son alive, seemingly knowing something that the doctors did not, George Sr. armed himself and intervened. I felt hopeless. They were moving too fast. The hospital, the nurses, the doctors. This dedicated dad, protecting what? His son, told Click to Houston at the time. After entering the Tomball Regional Medical Center in Houston, determined to make sure his son was given more time to recover, a standoff ensued as George Sr. barricaded himself in his son's room. George Sr. was willing was willing to risk jail time and even death if it meant getting his son a few more minutes on this earth and a chance to survive. A SWAT team was kept at bay as an armed George Sr. sat with his son and prayed for a sign of life. George Sr.'s other son was allowed in the room and eventually talked down his father. However, because his father was armed, police were held off long enough for something amazing to happen. Towards the end of the standoff, which was about 3 hours long, he felt his son squeeze his hand. The lawyer's family, Phoebe Smith, said. At this time, the SWAT team had already opened the door to the critical care room. He had surrendered to the police, but he surrendered knowing his son had squeezed his hand. He squeezed his hand. Had he not been armed, police would have removed George Sr. in only a few minutes. They would have never felt his son squeeze his hand, and life support would have been pulled. To confirm the father's claims that his son had shown signs of life, the SWAT team even sent in their own doctors. The SWAT team had their own doctors. When they entered into the critical care room, they saw that my client's son was not brain dead because he was making eye contact, was following their commands, and they were completely amazed at this, Smith added. Had an armed father not decided to take a stand, his son would likely be dead right now. The amazing thing was that my client was right, and his son did survive. When you see him now, he is a picture of health. I don't think he would have survived, but for the fact that his father slowed the process down, Smith said. This case has always been about a father protecting his son when his son couldn't protect himself, she said. That's exactly what I'm talking about. This is what men, in part, are here to do. And that right, that privilege, that mission has been taken away, snatched away, robbed, and we are toothless as a result of it. And we've lost our way. We need to reclaim that. George Sr. was charged with 2 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, but one was later dismissed and the other lessened to a state jail felony. However, this father of 3 doesn't regret any of it, including the jail time he served after. Could you imagine the respect that guy got in jail? That guy probably had so much respect in jail. People were giving him cigarettes, giving him extra food, which is always a problem in jail. Not the cigarettes part, but the food part. What are you in for? Well, my son was in a coma, and they wanted to pull the plug and had an AR-15. And I held a SWAT team at bay with that AR-15. What happened to your son? I actually lived. Can you imagine being in jail telling that story? Those guys just be shaking their heads, giving them high fives. Not that that's what you want to do, but this is what happens when you actually have your proponent or some piece of truth that is a pretty significant part of an experience. That guy can hold his head high. There was a law broken, but it was broken for all the right reasons. I'm here now because of it, George Jr. told Fox 6. Before I get into the Kanye stuff, let's just get into the chat room, see what's going on there. A lot of comments today in the chat room. Emasculated male. It started with the women's movement. Equal rights is one thing. It started a bit before the women's movement, but the women's movement was a real topper, Lynn, I got to say. What else is going on here? Son's organs. Don just said they wanted his son's organs. Quite possibly. But his son probably was not that healthy. I saw the picture of the son. Didn't look that healthy. There's a lot of interesting comments. The women's movement was a big part of it. Big part of it. But when men lost the right to protect their family, they lost a big piece. And then when being able to actually produce products of value and worth. Oh, look, I'm not knocking the internet. I'm not knocking digital culture. It's allowing me to do this right now. I'm not going to be a fucking hypocrite. Okay? But there is a trade-off when you actually create something that's material. There is an act of transmutation when you create something that's material. It's a cool thing. We've lost touch with it, literally and figuratively. Okay, let's get into the Kanye piece, the Kanye program. Here's what I find interesting. Kanye West was hospitalized for a significant period of time. And what happened? He comes out of the hospitalization. If you look at him when he comes out of the hospitalization, he looks just like that Ryan King, the Ryan King kid. What was his Ryan King? The Waffle House shooter looks just like him. Same, prison yard stare. What do they call it? The 1,000-yard stare. They're just looking off into the distance. There's nobody home at times. Me watched him, and I was looking at tweets and stuff, and he was coming through something. He was not all there. Now all of a sudden he's coming back online. But you have to wonder. And I'm not saying this happened. Okay? I'm not saying this happened. But we know that we live in a world, in a culture where people are psychotronically triggered and programmed every single day. Whether it's the media they watch on TV, whether it's the memes they consume, whether it's the screens that have become their permanent interface, whether it's the social programming that is connected, in the octopus network that links all of it up. You go back to the 1960s, 1970s, the MK Ultra stuff. I mean, we talk about this all the time. What happened to Kanye when he was out of commission? It would have been very easy, and I'm not saying this happened, but you have to take this into account on some level. It could have been very easy to reprogram Kanye. And he comes out now and he's this kind of truth avenger. It's kind of interesting. I'll grant you. It's interesting. Is he saving the world like Jordan Sather has proclaimed? I'm not sure if he's saving the world, but he's certainly pissing off a lot of people. And that's not always a bad thing. He's probably worth following on Twitter. But I'm wondering what would happen. Because right now, man, the Cernoviches and the Posobiaks and all these cats are loving it. They're loving it. Because Kanye is basically dismantling the left and the Democratic Party. And he's challenging people inside of his own community, whether it's the hip-hop community, the artistic community, the fashion community, the black community. He's challenging them. But remember, he's connected to the Kardashians. And the Kardashians are witches. They're witches, and they practice Enochian, dualistic magic. And look at what happened with Bruce Jenner. Right? He went from being a man to a woman. Kanye is essentially, and again, I'm going to use this in kind of a pejorative sense, but Kanye's gone from being black to white. I mean, think about it, right? I mean, theoretically, technically, he's standing up for the Trump, Republican Party, values, ideas that are consistently connected with what? Rich old white men and Trump as a white supremacist, a racist, a misogynist, on and on and on. Now, if you drill down, Kanye is basically all saying, hey, look, it's all about love. Can we get together? Can we love one another? So he's rounding off the dualistic experience. But he's creating a major schism. So you look at Bruce Jenner, he went from being a man to a woman, and Kanye is going from the left to the right, black to the white. And he wouldn't say that, but you can make kind of a case. I bet you if you ask people inside the black community, is Kanye and Uncle Tom? Well, I used to like Kanye. Hell yeah. Hell to the yeah, he's becoming an Uncle Tom. I follow some random and not so popular people on Twitter. And there's this one gal who has a Twitter feed called Stilettos and Hoops. And she's basically like a basketball fashionista. She's into basketball, she's into hip-hop culture, and she's into fashion. And she had a tweet like, Kanye what the fuck is going on, smacking my head, I'm done. There you go. And that's one person. Snoop Dogg at a high level has completely disowned Kanye. I think he might even put a contract out on him or something. I think one of Snoop Dogg's buddies from the Dog Pounds, like, threatened to kill Kanye. So you see what I'm saying? Now, did he do this of his own volition? Did he come through his experience? Did he have a Howard Beale moment? Right? Is that what happened? Or did something else happen to Kanye West when he was hospitalized? It'll be very interesting. And here's the litmus. Keep an eye on this. If Kanye circles back and then starts to disassemble the venerated values of the MAGA culture. Like, let's say Kanye says we shouldn't be going to war in Iran. Let's say Kanye says Bibi Netanyahu is just another con man, not a Kanye man, but a con man, like I saw over and over again in the music industry. Whoa, what do you think is going to happen? What do you think the Posobieks and the Cernoviches and the Laura Loomers and all these, fake kind of conservative alt-right people would say about that? Do you think that they would still hold Kanye West to their bosom buddy? Well, that would be real interesting now, wouldn't it? I'm not sure it'll happen, but that would be the litmus test. Kanye, if you're listening to my podcast, then you're real. You want to keep it real, right? You want to be disruptive. Be disruptive to both sides. Confound people. Completely confound them. The Kanye program. All right. Hour and 20 minutes. Wow, the time flies, right? But look, today we got a lot of news. We had a nicely segued, fairly well thought out presentation. Went down a few alleyways and byways, but such is life. All right, let's get on out of here. I hope you found today's show to be, at the very least, informational, enlightening, and at times humorous. This is what we strive for each day on 15 Minutes of Flame. And you can find me at robertphoenix.com, over on Facebook and on Twitter. Robert Phoenix, Dude Max. This show will show up on YouTube in the next 30 minutes or so. You know the drill. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to step what's possible, and go Kanye, man. Let's see how far you can push this. And if you can break the programming of the programming.
You're listening to 15 Minutes of Flame with Robert Phoenix.